Good evening. This is January the 30th, 2023. I hope everybody's had a great day. Where I live, it's been cold and raining, and of course, I guess we should expect that in the month of January. It is winter, but anyway, it's been colder and has the last few days, but uh, we trust God to keep us all safe and sound. I want to talk to you tonight about a day 50 years ago, January 30th, 1973. As I've stated in a number of videos, January of 1973 was a very important year in history. And this is an outstanding book by James Rodinalt, January 1973, Watergate, Roe v. Wade, Vietnam, and the month that changed America forever. Uh, he writes here that on the final Sunday in January 1973, that was January the 28th, the New York Times ran a probing and prescient editorial that uncannily anticipated what would be Nixon's final crisis, entitled Now It's in a Mood for a Real Fight. The piece focused on the puzzle of the continuing hostility between the White House and Congress, and even though the war had ended, there was an almost audible sigh of relief on Capitol Hill last week when a declaration of a Vietnam Accord wiped out the chief stimulus of the congressional movement to recapture power from the White House, the Times observed. Yet, curiously enough, by halting combat in Indochina, President Nixon may have increased the prospects for an all out battle with Congress. Peace, in other words, had left him vulnerable. With just 3 days left, January 1973 prepared for its final shocks. And so, what happened on January 30th? That was on a Tuesday. Well, bass guitarist Gene Klein and rhythm guitarist Stanley Essen, members of the heavy metal band Wicked Lester, introduced their reimagined format, wearing face makeup and playing before a group of 10 customers at the Popcorn Club, a bar located in the borough of Queens in New York City. Klein renamed himself Gene Simmons, while Essen became Paul Stanley. With drummer George Peter Chrysola, known as Peter Criss, and lead guitarist Paul Ace Frehley, the band played for the first time under the name of Kiss. And they became a very popular band. I was never a fan of theirs. India nationalized its remaining private coal mines, bringing 184 under control of the government company. The crash of a train into a bus killed 37 people, injured 18 others in Hungary. The U.S. Department of Defense announced the list of 555 prisoners of war. It included a U.S. Marine, Private First Class Ronald L. Ridgway of Houston, who had been listed as killed in action on February 25, 1968. Ridgway had been on patrol with 8 other Marines during the Battle of Khe Sanh, when the group was ambushed and a group burial had been made in the Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in St. Louis. After more than 5 years as a prisoner of war in Hanoi Hilton, Ridgway was released with the other listed POWs on March 16, 1973, and would work in administration with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs after returning to civilian life. G. Gordon Liddy and James W. McCord Jr., both former officials of CREEP, that is, Committee to Re-elect the President, had coordinated the U.S. Nixon's re-election campaign, were convicted by a federal jury in Washington on charges of conspiracy to spy on the Democratic officials at the Watergate Hotel. Unlike other five persons charged, Lydia McCord had declined to enter a plea bargain, and the jury returned guilty verdicts after less than 90 minutes of deliberation. These trials were presided over by Judge John Sirica, and U.S. Senator John C. Stennis of Mississippi was shot and wounded in front of his Washington, D.C. home in an armed robbery by two young men who took his wallet, 25 cents, and his watch. The shooting did not appear to be politically motivated. Despite a wound to the chest, Senator Stennis recovered after undergoing surgery at Walter Reed Hospital. 6 weeks later, on March the 12th, three young men were arrested by the FBI and charged with assault on a member of Congress. One pleaded guilty. Also that day, 125 officers and enlisted men out of the 37,000 Republic of Korea troops who were still remaining in South Vietnam returned home to Seoul as South Korea's pullout from the Vietnam War began. So that was a lot of things were taking place. It was on the next day of January 31st that Nixon held a press conference and lied about wanting to heal domestic wounds by attacking those who wanted peace at any price. In 1973, he said we all have to pay for our mistakes regarding draft dodgers. Then a year later, those words came back to haunt him in dealing with Watergate. And Robinault points out what has been all but lost to history is the close interconnectedness of the Watergate drama and the conclusion of the Vietnam War. Those events were side by side in the news for months on end. The two danced together in a mutually dependent political battle. And Judge Sirica was Time Magazine's 1973 Man of the Year. And things would go from bad to worse eventually for Nixon. And Watergate, no doubt, doomed Nixon's Vietnam policies. In conclusion, Robinault writes that by the time of the Tea Party, an offshoot and descendant of the religious right and the Nixon counter-revolution, depending on one's perspective, compromise was simply no longer acceptable. Deadlock in Congress became a form of anti-dissent. A system built on checks and balances now had only checks. And Nixon and Charles Colson actually foresaw one of the mechanisms that would assist in the counter-revolution. In a call on December 27, 1972, the two spoke about the need for revenge against CPS, which had been scathing in its reporting about the Christmas bombings. Whatever we can do to them, they deserve, Colson said. That's right, Nixon replied. One thing we're going to do is go all out for cable. I think that cable hurts all the networks. That'll really stir them up. He had no idea. This, then, is the legacy of January 1973. The me generation found its voice. Religion became a political force. Poverty and civil rights became someone else's problem. And the national will for concerted action for the common good of all its citizens was scattered into 1,000 points of light. At some point, perhaps those scattered lights will reform and reunite to give birth to a rededicated nation, one that includes a place for everyone, opportunity for all, and help for those who need it. After all, it only takes a moment in time and some simultaneity. As Lyndon Johnson so aptly observed in his greatest speech, the We Shall Overcome speech, there are times in America when history and fate meet at a single time in a single space to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. Let us hope such a time is nearing. Thus, that can be considered the legacy of January 1973 and 50 years ago. Again, I remember that quite well. I was 21 at the time. I was living in Waco, my hometown, and was a senior, last semester senior at Baylor University. I was still nursing my wounds. I've said that over and over again, but sometimes you nurse your wounds for a long time. I had lost a church, been voted out at Whitney, and that was hard. In 1993, which was 20 years after that, and 30 years ago, I had lunch with a friend, and he hit the nail right on the head when he said, "You never gave that church up." That was true then, and it's true now. And I see no reason to give it up. You stand for right, you stand for right. I was trying to figure out a way to have some sort of ministry there. Everything I tried didn't work. Then I was offered a summer job selling books for Southwestern Company from Nashville, and ended up spending the summer in the beautiful community of Pulaski, Virginia, Appalachian area. Wonderful time. And graduated on May 18th, started graduate school that fall in church state studies, talking about religion and politics coming together. I've devoted much of my life to research the relationship between religion and politics. And it's definitely there. Foundation for a lot of this was laid in January of 1973. So this will be my last video in the series about January. Hopefully, I'll be doing some more videos this year about the year 1973, because there were other important events in the following 11 months. January was not the only month of importance, but the fact that so many things happened that were historic in nature, related to Watergate, related to Vietnam, Roe v. Wade, the death of Lyndon Baines Johnson, George Foreman's defeat of Joe Frazier. Super Bowl VII, Elvis concert in Honolulu. The peace treaties ending the Vietnam War. We go on and on and on about that. January 1973 was an important month in history. A lot of vivid memories from that month. Have a great evening.